What happens when a country's biggest, most trusted airline just stops flying? Today, we're dissecting the shocking collapse of Indigo, an airline that was, for all intents and purposes, a symbol of reliability in India.
So let's set the scene. Picture this. It's December 2025. We're talking peak holiday season, peak wedding season. The airports are absolutely jammed, just buzzing with energy.
And who's running the show in the skies? Indigo. I mean, they aren't just a player, they are the game, with over 60% of the entire market. For millions, flying Indigo was just what you did. They were famous for one thing above all else, being on time. They were the absolute backbone of air travel in India.
And then, boom, almost overnight, that backbone just snapped. The entire airline was paralyzed. This created a nationwide crisis, stranding hundreds of thousands of people and sending shockwaves through the economy. But here's the thing, this was not a surprise.
Yeah, this wasn't some sudden black swan event that nobody saw coming. No, this was what's known as a gray rhino. A threat that's huge, it's obvious, it's literally charging right at you, and yet it gets ignored. For 2 full years, this thing was thundering towards Indigo. And management? Well, they chose to look the other way. Today, we're going to find out why.
Okay, so first, let's really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this chaos. You have to understand, this wasn't just a few delays here and there. This was a complete and total operational meltdown.
Get this. At the absolute peak of the crisis, on one single day, Indigo canceled over 1,000 flights. 1,000! That is nearly half of its entire daily operation just gone.
And Wall Street's reaction? Oh, it was brutal, and it was immediate. In just a few days, over 37,000 crore rupees, that's about 4.4 billion US dollars, in shareholder wealth was completely wiped out. Poof!
But the human cost, that was immense. Airports across the entire country just descended into absolute chaos. You had families trying to get to weddings, people heading off for holidays, and they were all just stranded. And for days, there was nothing but radio silence from the airline. Terminals became scenes of pure desperation, with people literally sleeping on the floors, surrounded by piles of luggage.
So, what on earth caused all this? Well, the investigation quickly zeroed in on the primary trigger, a new set of safety rules. And the irony is, they were designed to make flying safer for everyone.
These rules are called FDTL, which stands for Flight Duty Time Limitations. Just think of them as the official rulebook for how long pilots can work. The goal is simple, and it's totally non-negotiable: reduce pilot fatigue. Because let's be honest, a tired pilot is a massive safety risk.
Now this one change, which seems kinda small, had enormous consequences. The new rules required pilots to have 48 continuous hours of rest every week, up from 36. That extra 12 hours of rest, when you multiplied across thousands of pilots, fundamentally broke the math behind Indigo's entire scheduling model.
But the real fatal blow? It came from this rule right here. Indigo's entire low-cost business was built on what you'd call red-eye efficiency, keeping their planes flying 24/7. Before, one crew could do multiple short hops overnight. The new rules? They limited crews to just 2 landings per night. Suddenly, a route that used to need 1 crew now needed 2, sometimes even 3. Their night operations, the very core of their efficiency, became instantly unworkable with the staff they had.
And that brings us to the central mystery of this entire crisis. I mean, if the rules changed for everyone, why was it only the market leader that got completely crushed?
This is the crucial question, right? Air India, Akasa, SpiceJet, they all had to deal with the same new regulations, and they all kept flying. So why was Indigo, the biggest and supposedly the most efficient of them all, the only one to just completely fall apart? Well, the answer isn't in the regulations. It's in a series of absolutely disastrous choices made by the airline itself.
This was a self-inflicted wound, plain and simple. Indigo operated on a razor's edge with what's called skeletal staffing, leaving absolutely no buffer for disruptions. And even though they had a 2-year warning that these new rules were coming, they failed to hire more crew. Actually, they did the opposite. They increased their flight schedule, selling tickets for flights they had to have known they couldn't staff. And to top it all off, a fumbled tech update to their rostering software left them unable to even manage the pilots they did have. It was just a perfect storm of corporate negligence. The fallout from Indigo's failure was immediate, and it was widespread. Now, while it was absolute chaos for passengers, for everyone else in the industry, it was a golden opportunity. You could see the market reacting in real time. While Indigo was being forced to cut its schedule by up to 10%, its rivals pounced. Air India started deploying its big international jets on domestic routes just to soak up demand. And SpiceJet? They went on the attack, aggressively expanding their own schedule by 26%, directly capturing the airport slots and passengers that Indigo had to abandon. For passengers, the pain was just immense. With thousands of flights vanishing, fares on competing airlines for simple domestic routes skyrocketed, sometimes hitting 40,000 rupees. Indigo had to process over 800 crore rupees in refunds, but the biggest cost? It was intangible. It was the complete and utter destruction of its brand promise of reliability.
The government, meanwhile, was caught in a real bind. On one hand, they had to punish the airline. So they issued notices, they forcibly cut its schedule, and they stripped it of prime airport slots. But they also couldn't just let the country's largest airline completely fail. So they offered a carrot, a temporary exemption from the very rules Indigo had failed to prepare for. It's the classic too big to fail dilemma.
So let's be clear, this crisis wasn't just some temporary disruption. It marks a permanent change for Indigo and really for the future of Indian aviation as a whole.
For Indigo, the era of running on a razor's edge is over. They now have to operate with a permanent buffer of about 20% more pilots, which means higher costs that will most likely get passed on to passengers. Pilot unions are now in a much stronger negotiating position. And most importantly, the airline has to spend years rebuilding the trust that completely shattered in a matter of days.
You know, if there's one single lesson to take away from this entire fiasco, it's this. An airline can chase efficiency and push the limits for years, but in the end, safety regulations aren't just suggestions, they are the law. And in that battle between commercial efficiency and regulatory safety, the regulator eventually always wins.
And that leaves us with a final, lingering question. Indigo got a government exemption because it was deemed too big to fail. But its failures cost passengers their money, their time, and their trust. It really makes you wonder, when a company becomes so dominant that it's considered too big to fail, who's the one that ultimately pays the price for its mistakes?